new movement, that they will stumble out the gate, is her words, that she's very concerned that they have too many things that they want to focus on, that they will lose focus, they will not be able to hone in on one thing, and they also didn't have a central leader. So she kind of foreshadows how effective is this movement going to be without one goal and one strong leader, or at least one team of leaders. So again, to the media, she says, hurrah, and good luck, ladies, but behind closed doors, she's very concerned about what these young women are going to do with her movement and her ERA.
Definitely, definitely. And there is still plenty of questions to get answered. I mean, obviously, as the women's movement has moved forward out of the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and these are things that we're still addressing. Certainly, you can't, and as we are coming up on an election year, you simply can't turn on the TV or the radio without hearing something about the women's vote and who's doing what and what the organizations are saying and that sort of thing. So it's definitely...
Stay tuned, because we've got 100 years of women voting.
We do.
Coming in 2020.
Centennial for suffrage is in 2020, so
yes.
there's a lot of work, might I say, to be done before then, so that we can celebrate that in the manner that we should be. I think we are completely out of time, Tom. I'm fairly certain we are. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for coming tonight and being here. And for all of your excellent questions. We have literature from the organizations out on the table directly outside of the theater, and there's contact information for people as well. So we can certainly share that if you had a question but you didn't get to it. So we'd be happy to pass that along. All right.
I was born Ida B. Wells in Holly Springs, Mississippi, before the close of the Civil War. My parents, who had been slaves and married as such, were married again after freedom came. My father had been taught the carpenter's trade, and my mother was a famous cook. My father, called Jim, was the son of his master and one of his slave women, Peggy. Mr. Wells had no children by his wife, and my father grew up on the plantation. He knew little of the cruelties of slavery. I do not remember when or where I started school. My earliest recollections are of reading the newspaper to my father and an admiring group of his friends. The Freeman's Aid had established in 1866 one of its schools in our town. It was called Shaw University then, but is now Russ College. I was visiting my grandmother down on the farm when life became a reality to me. One day, a hail at the gate brought me to the door. 3 horsemen were there, and one of them handed me a letter telling the progress of the yellow fever, and these words leaped out at me: Jim and Lizzie Wells have both died of the fever. I wanted to go home at once. I was the oldest of 7 living children. There was nobody but me to look after them now. When I got home, I found 2 of the children in bed with the fever. All had had slight attacks of it, save Eugenia, my older sister, who was paralytic. The baby, Stanley, had died. So I took the examination for a country school teacher, and I got a school 6 miles out in the country. After 1 term, I went to Memphis on an invitation of an aunt. My Aunt Belle said she would take care of Eugenia. My 2 brothers were put to work on their farm, and I took the 2 little girls with me to Memphis. I secured a school in Shelby County, Tennessee, which paid a better salary. One day, while riding on the train back to my school, May 4th, 1884, I took a seat in the latest coach, as usual. The conductor took my ticket, then handed it back to me, and told me that he couldn't take my ticket there. In a little while, when he finished taking tickets, he came back and told me I would have to go in the other car. I refused, saying that the forward car was a smoker, and as I was in the latest car, I proposed to stay. He tried to drag me out of the seat, but the moment he caught hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth in the back of his hand. I had braced my feet against the seat in front and was holding to the back. He went forward and got the baggage man and another man to help him. And of course, they succeeded in dragging me out. They were encouraged to do this by the attitude of white ladies and gentlemen, some applauding the conductor for his brave stand. I hired a colored lawyer to bring suit against the railroad. After months of delay, I found out he had been bought off. I had to get a white one. Judge Greer kept his word, and in the circuit court, Judge Pierce, an ex-Union soldier, awarded me damages of $500. The railroad appealed the case to the state Supreme Court, which reversed the findings of the lower court. In the year 1886, I taught in California, Missouri, and Tennessee. I never cared for teaching. but I had always been very conscientious in trying to do my work honestly. The correspondence I had built up in newspaper work gave me an outlet. The Reverend William J. Simmons, D.D., could not resist the opportunity to look up the brilliant Iola, my pen name. He wanted me as a correspondent of his paper and offered me $1 a letter weekly. For the next 3 years, I was on staff of the American Baptists. Dr. Simmons encouraged me to be a newspaper woman. I bought 1/3 interest in Free Speech and Headlight of Memphis. I was editor. Things went along smoothly for the next 2 years until an article I had written about the city schools. I was still teaching. Yet, I felt some protests should be made over the conditions in the colored schools. The school board failed to re-elect me. While I was thus carrying on the work of my newspaper and had proved that I could make a living of it, there came the lynching in Memphis, which changed my whole life. Because I saw the chance to be of more service to the cause, I took a position on the New York Age and continued to fight against lynching and lynchers. About 2 months after my appearance in the New York Age, 2 colored women said they thought that the women of New York and Brooklyn should do something to show appreciation for my work. This led to meetings, which grew in interest and numbers, and culminating in a testimonial at Lyric Hall on October 5th, 1892. The slogan adopted was to raise enough to enable Miss Wells to publish her paper, Free Speech, again. The older inhabitants conceded this testimonial to be the greatest demonstration attempted by race women for one of their number. The best womanhood of those 2 cities and the leading colored women of Boston and Philadelphia came, a brilliant array. It was the beginning of the club movement among colored women in this country. The women of New York and Brooklyn decided to continue the organization, which they called the Women's Lawyer Union. Later on, women in Boston organized themselves into Women's Era Club of that city. Another great result of that wonderful testimony in New York was an invitation to England and the beginning of a worldwide campaign against lynching. When I finished my work in England, I went to Chicago and the 1893 World's Fair. The Torgy Club set aside Thursday afternoon as Ladies' Day and invited me to speak to the club. I told them of the club movement in the East and urged them to consider establishing an organization of their own in Chicago. The outcome was the permanent organization of what was called the Chicago Women's Club. I took work on the Chicago Conservatoire, settled down to make Chicago my home, and develop the Women's Club. Then I was invited to return to England and sail the following February, 1894. During my absence, the club applied to the state for a charter and took my name for its own. Upon return in August, I came to Chicago. The Ida B. Wells Club took a leading part in helping to arrange a wonderful program. Mr. F.L. Barnett presided. One evening, at the close of an address in Rochester, New York, a young man sneeringly asked, "If colored people were so badly treated in the South, why didn't more of them come north?" Miss Susan B. Anthony said, "I'll answer that question. It is because we here in the North do not treat Negroes any better than they do in the South." She strove to inform her townspeople on this subject too. As her guest, she remarked to me at the breakfast table that I could use the stenographer to help with my correspondence. When she returned, she found me busily engaged. "Did my secretary come?" I said, "No." She went into her office, came back into my room and said, "Well, she's gone." I said, "Who?" She said, "The stenographer." I asked her, "Why didn't you tell Miss Wells what I said about writing some letters for her?" Then the girl said, "It's all right for you, Miss Anthony, to treat Negroes as equals, but I refuse to take dictation from a colored woman." "Indeed," said Miss Anthony. "Miss Wells is my guest, and any insult to her is an insult to me. Come, get your bonnet and go." Those were precious days in which I sat at the feet of this pioneer and veteran in the work of women's suffrage. But she also told me that when the Equal Suffrage Association went to Atlanta, she asked Frederick Douglass not to come because she did not want him to be subjected to humiliation. And she didn't want anything to get in the way of bringing the Southern white women into our suffrage association. "And you think I was wrong in doing so?" she asked. I said, "Yes, because she confirmed white women in their attitude of segregation." She showed no resentment of my attitude and seemed eager to hear all sides of my question. On June 27, 1895, I was married in the city of Chicago to attorney F.L. Burnett. When the Ida B. Wells Club knew about it, they asked for the privilege of giving me a reception and managing the whole affair. The Women's Republic State Central Committee attended in a body, accompanied by their husbands. The church was filled to overflowing. I decided to continue work as a journalist, for this was my first, and might be said, my only love. I had already purchased the conservatory from Mr. Burnett and others who owned it. My duties as editor, as president of the Ida B. Wells Women's Club, as speaker in many white women's clubs, kept me pretty busy, but not too busy to give birth to a male child, March 23, 1896. When the meeting of the Association of Colored Women's Clubs was called in Washington, I was present with my 4-month-old baby. It was a famous gathering of famous women. There was the only daughter of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Mrs. Booker T. Washington, and Mrs. Church Terrell, who was believed to be the most highly educated woman we had in the race. She was chosen president of the consolidated organization. In September, I found the political pot beginning to boil. Our Women's State Central Committee wanted me to travel throughout the state again. I said I would. I greatly enjoyed these meetings and the opportunity to show the women of the state why they should organize. In only a few instances did I see any of my own people. For if the white women were backward in political matters, our own women were even more so. About 1913, the Illinois legislature was considering enfranchising the women voters of the state. I had been a member of the Women's Suffrage Association all during my residence in Illinois. When I saw that we were likely to have a restricted suffrage, and the white women of the organization were working like beavers to bring it about, I organized what became known as the Afro Suffrage Club with a white colleague, Belle Squire. I was elected president and delegated to attend the March 1913 parade, sponsored by the National American Woman Suffrage Association in the nation's capital. But because of racist attitudes, colored women were relegated to the back of the line. I refused and told them that the Southern women had tried to evade the question time and time again by giving some excuse or other every time it had been brought up. If the Illinois women did not take a stand now in this great Democratic parade, then the colored women were lost. I declared, I shall not march at all unless I can march under the Illinois banner. I was asked to come down here to march with the other women of our state, and I intend to do so or not take part in the parade at all. Either I go with you or not at all. I am not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition. I am doing it for the future benefit of my whole race. And I left. But as the delegates marched down Pennsylvania Avenue, I quietly walked out calmly to the delegation and assumed my place alongside Belle Squire and Virginia Brooks in the Illinois delegation. I had a smile on my face. By the end of June 1913, Illinois became the first state east of the Mississippi River to enfranchise its women. We could vote in municipal, presidential, and in some state contests. We, the women of the Afro Suffrage Club, wasted no time. We canvassed the neighborhood block by block, asking women to register so that they would help put a colored man on the city council. By 1916, the Afro Suffrage Club had 200 members, and that year, we helped elect Chicago's first black alderman, Oscar D. Priest. I continued to work actively for civic, social, political, and racial justice. And in 1930, I ran for state senator as an independent, but lost to the incumbent. I leave you with one thought. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, which should be exercised in the preservation of our rights.
Michelle,
Hallelujah.
it's so good to see you. So,
You too.
it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, Michelle Duster. She is a writer, speaker, professor, and champion of racial and gender equity. In the last dozen years, she has written, edited, or contributed to 11 books. She co-wrote the popular and fun to read children's history book, Tate and His Historic Dream. She co-edited Shifts, an anthology of women's growth through change, and Michelle Obama's impact on African-American women and girls. She has edited 2 books that include the writings of her great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. You will be able to order those later. She has written articles for Essence, Huffington Post, Teen Vogue, and Time, a wonderful piece for Time in the last week. And her advocacy has led to street names, monuments, historical markers, and other public history projects that highlight women and African Americans, including her great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. She has 3 forthcoming books. In September of 2020, Impact, Personal Portraits of Activism, co-edited with Trina Sotira. Ida B. the Queen, wonderful title, coming from Simon & Schuster in January 2021. And Ida B. Wells, Voice of Truth, coming in spring of 22. She is a native Chicagoan who earned her BA in psychology from Dartmouth College and an MA in media studies from the New School in New York City. So Michelle, I'm so glad you could join us in this amazing week as we are observing the Centennial. The narrative of the 19th Amendment is being reframed as this centennial is being observed, and Ida B. Wells is front and center. I'm imagining that you think it is about time. So talk to us about all of the things that, not all, but the things that she has done that finally are getting recognition. It's suffrage, it's lynching, it's all kinds of other things. So it's her moment, I think.
Yeah, I think, just based on the work that she did, like you said, I mean, in journalism, investigative journalism, she basically was a pioneer in data journalism. And she was working during a time where there was a lot of violence, a lot of state-sanctioned violence against African Americans. And so that's sort of relevant today. And I think that's why, people are finding the work that she did to be interesting to learn about, because they see parallels between her time and what we're dealing with now. And then when it comes to obviously the centennial of the 19th Amendment, but in addition to that specific date, we're just seeing a resurgence of sort of focus on women in politics and women's voices in power structure, with the 116th Congress, having so many women, Hillary Clinton, running for president in 2016. And so I think all of these things are converging to kind of, talk about how women have been involved in politics and how we have fought over the centuries, really like a century and a half at this point, or maybe close to 2 centuries, for political involvement and engagement. So I think all of these things are sort of converging at the same time, and Ida was involved in all of it during her lifetime. So I think people are starting to re-examine what she did.
Well, and as we just heard in her own words, as we were revisited by Ida B. Wells, she really, as you say, was involved in so many things, with the founding of the NAACP, the founding of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, the Alpha Suffrage Club, National Equal Rights League. She was an institution builder as well as an activist. Sometimes those things don't go hand in hand. What was it that, we know that her friends were lynched, but how did she turn that incident into international travel and advocacy for lynching?
Well, I really think that one thing kind of led to another. I really truly believe that she could not have planned out her life the way that it turned out. I mean, her friends were lynched and she was outraged, and she decided to write about it in Memphis. And she ultimately ended up in New York. She was traveling in Philadelphia for a church conference, and then ultimately went up to New York. And when she got there, that's when she learned that her printing press had been destroyed and she couldn't go back home. She was advised by the people in Memphis to not come back because it was just too tense and crazy for her to go back. So T. Thomas Fortune offered for her to work with him, and she started speaking in New York about what was going on in the South. And there were women in New York and in the Eastern Seaboard who were activists, and they invited her to speak to these women's groups. And they're the ones who encouraged her to collect her. She had written newspaper articles in the New York Age about what was going on in the South. And so she compiled those into Southern Horrors, Lynch Law, and All Its Phases. And while she was on this, doing these speaking engagements locally in New York and Philadelphia, a woman from England heard her speak. And so one thing led to another, and she ended up being invited to Britain. Well, actually the United Kingdom, because she went to Scotland also. And so it's just kind of, you know, one thing after another that turned her into international crusade. And her purpose was to educate people about what was going on in the South in order to encourage outside pressure on the South to stop this lawlessness, because she knew it wasn't going to happen from inside the South. So at first it was the northern part of the country, and then it was like, okay, well, let's get the world involved.
Well, you know, and she was a catalyst for so many things that happened. When, if I'm remembering my history correctly, when she was traveling internationally, she was really attacked by a white male journalist who was really quite insulting to Black women. And that in some ways sparked the creation of the National Association of Colored Women, that the women were reacting. So that, and we see that those kinds of attacks on Black women, you know, whether it is Michelle Obama or whether it is Kamala Harris, continue. And she was really a person who was the target of that. I guess if there had been Twitter, she would have been trolled.
Well, she was trolled in the Twitter of her day. You know, I mean, it was relentless. And I mean, when she was in England, there were quite a few exchanges of basically editorial, like op-eds, where it was like war between her and some people in Memphis that were trying to disparage her and, you know, basically say she was, you know, telling nothing but lies and don't believe this wench. And this is the language that was being used against her. And then she was responding back. It was just slower than Twitter, but it was the same thing, really.
And then I think her activism with anti-lynching and her work in helping to co-found the NAACP then led to other involvement. And when we get to the 1913 parade, that story is often told of how she inserted herself and marched. What do you think was what led to that? What is that fearlessness that she seems to have had? What is the source of that?
I think, I mean, this, I can just, you know, theorize. I really do believe that some, not all, but some of what was going on during the 1913 parade had to do with her age. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think about it as she was a mother. At that point, she had children who were, her youngest child was in his late teen, and her oldest child was in his late teens. So, and she had stepchildren who were significantly older. So you think about if you're a woman who's have a mother of 25 to 30-year-old children, and you have a 25-year-old telling you to get in the back, you know, you're like, no, who do you think you're talking to? So I think there was an age dynamic there, as well as just her personality of not, you know, accepting second-class citizenship. So she, I mean, because she sued the railroad when she was 22 years old. So she had a sense of indignation from a very young age. So I just think it's a combination of everything that she was like, there's no way you're going to tell me to go to the back.
Well, you know, this is why it's so valuable to have your personal insight, because you know her personality, because you know about her. I had not really thought about the 25-year-old and her stepchildren, but that's really, you know, quite instructive to think about that. So many parallels with then and now. The 1917 East St. Louis race riot, you and I we bonded initially over the connection between my great-grandmother, Madam C.J. Walker, and Ida B. Wells. I was really totally thrilled when I first read Crusade for Justice, her autobiography, and saw that she had mentioned Madam Walker, and then to discover in their correspondence that they had both been involved in the anti-lynching movement. Obviously, Ida was, you know, on the front lines, and Madam Walker was playing a different role, but they both intersected at investigating and looking at the 1917 East St. Louis riot. That seems to have been very similar to the response to George Floyd. Can you talk a bit about why she went and investigated and what came of that?
Well, well, the similarity between, you know, that situation and George Floyd is that she was, that there was state sanctioned violence. That's the similarity. The difference is that what happened in East St. Louis was significantly larger scale. There was an attack on the entire Black community. And there were several days rioting where an incredible amount of property was damaged, and there was several hundred deaths. So it was more like widespread mayhem that happened in East St. Louis. And the issue was that the Illinois state troopers stood by and watched Black people be attacked without doing anything to protect Black people. And so Ida felt very strongly that the state was involved in this violence. And so she went down to East St. Louis and interviewed people up close and personal, and got their firsthand accounts of what exactly happened. And she published her findings and went to the governor of Illinois, basically to indict him on the fact that Illinois residents were not protected by the law in the state of Illinois. So there's some similarities, but there's some differences, because there wasn't really an uprising with the community based on one incident. The entire community was attacked at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And then there was the response to the East St. Louis riot with the silent protest parade up Fifth Avenue. That's where the connection with Madam Walker comes in. And I think that certainly across the country, some of the demonstrations show that there's sometimes a catalyst that really motivates people. You know, since we're in this week of the ratification and the certification of the 19th Amendment, there are, as this history is being reframed, a lot of people are curious about whether Black women were suffragists, whether they were involved. And it seems that there had to be an intersection, because getting the right to vote for Black women had a very different motivation than it did for white suffragists. And I think Ida sort of brings us together with the activism for anti-lynching, but in general for other rights. You know, after she returned to Chicago after the March 1913 parade, she went right to work and had a big impact on Chicago politics. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the priest and the impact that she had?
Right. Well, yes, immediately after she got back from the 1913 parade, she organized the Alpha Suffrage Club. She had founded it just about a month before the parade. So she was busy expanding the club, you know, getting more members. And I think that there were about 200 to 300 members of the club after a while. And she encouraged her members to go canvassing door to door in the Bronzeville neighborhood. Bronzeville is sort of like Chicago's Harlem neighborhood, and encouraging women to register to vote. With the idea, her argument was that Black people need to take control of Black representation. And if we as a people can elect our own officials that will represent our our issues, then that will help us as a people. And so she started really focusing on local politics. It was not just citywide, but in the ward that she lived in. So she was very instrumental. She and the Alpha Suffrage Club were very instrumental in helping Oscar DePriest get elected in 1914 as the first African-American alderman in the city of Chicago. So he was instated in 1915. He ultimately went on to become one of the first Black congressperson after Reconstruction. So, you know, so Ida was involved in influencing local politics. After Oscar DePriest got elected, Ida's Alpha Suffrage Club then people realized that there was some power there. And so she started having politicians come to her to help, you know, gain support. And one of them was the person, I forgot his name now, but he ended up being the mayor of Chicago. So she really, you know, helped people understand that not only do we need to have the right to vote, but we need to have collective effort to elect certain people as a community. And that way we can have, you know, input into power over our own destiny.
Well, you know, and Chicago, when you think about Chicago machine politics, you think about the legacy of Chicago, that DePriest was one of the first Black congressmen elected in the 20th century. There was Harold Washington as mayor, a number of other long-term legacies in Chicago. And then, of course, there was Barack Obama, who was a community organizer. But I don't know if I think one would have to kind of draw the through line, but you have to say Ida really kind of planted those seeds for the strength of politics in the Black community in Chicago.
Wow. I hadn't thought about her in that way. But I think in general, Chicago is a very interesting city when it comes to Black power in general. I mean, you know, I grew up here and there is a very strong sense of organizing in the city, you know, I mean, we have, you know, Operation Push, the Nation of Islam is located in Chicago. And then obviously you have, you know, the first Black female senator came from out of Chicago, Carol Moseley Braun. And then obviously Barack Obama. So there's something about Chicago that really sort of breeds and grooms leaders, I think, on a national level. Maybe it's because Chicago has maybe Chicago is kind of a microcosm of the country where there's so many differing interests, and you have to be tough in order to make it in Chicago. So maybe you just kind of get trained, you know, very well in the city.
So we have a few questions that have come in from people who are watching. Someone was asking, what years was Ida riding on the railroad, and when did the lawsuit happen?
She was riding on the railroad, I think she started in 1881 when she moved to Memphis, because she was living in Memphis, but she was teaching in Woodstock, Tennessee. So she was basically commuting on the train every day for her job. And so she was riding for a couple of years before there was this push to segregate the train. And I think that's important for people to know, because she was riding the train for for a while with no problems. And then all of a sudden the state of Tennessee decided to implement these rules. And so that was her issue, was like, no, you're not going to suddenly just tell me I can't sit today where I was sitting yesterday. Mm-hmm. So she had her first incident in 1883 when she was riding from Memphis to Woodstock. And that's where she was basically assaulted. And then in 1884, she was riding from Woodstock back to Memphis. So she literally had two incidents, but the incident in 1884 is the one where she went straight to the attorney and filed a lawsuit.
Well, someone is asking, what are some of the similarities and maybe differences between today's women's organizing movements and Ida B. Wells's time?
Oh, I'm really not sure. I mean, you know, during Ida's time, I mean, women didn't have the right to vote for almost her whole life. I mean, she was 58 years old when women got the right to vote, when the 19th Amendment was passed, and she died when she was 68. So she only was alive for 10 years after women got the right to vote. So I think that women during her time were focused on women's clubs as a way of organizing, because that was one of the few ways that there was a way to have a voice. I mean, in today's world, we do have a little bit more rights than they did during that time. And so I think we have, maybe the organizing is a little bit more diluted to some extent, because of that. We have more rights, so.
So yeah, and I think maybe there was some sort of subterranean organizing that women could be members of the missionary society and church, and they organized around that, and that was less threatening, but they were still organizing. And exactly. Then the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, the women would organize around creating kindergartens and doing social kinds of things, but they were still being quite political and having national conventions. And she was a founder of that. So she, I think because of her travels, she was able to do the networking that sometimes brought other women together. Everybody couldn't travel, but she understood how to do that. Someone is asking, were Southern communities as aware of Ms. Wells as Northern communities? Memphis is certainly a Southern community.
Yeah, I think she was very well known during her day. I mean, as a journalist, her writings were what we would consider syndicated today. They were reprinted across the country. And so she was very well known, I think, across the country, among people who were reading newspapers. You know, I mean, the communication channels at that time were different than they are now. So I think things were a little bit more local. And then there were maybe, there weren't just the literacy rate was not as high then as it is now. So I think there might have been a little bit more of sort of a class kind of thing when it comes to people who were actually reading newspapers. But she was extremely famous during her day. So, and I don't think it was limited to a particular region.
Right. I mean, when we recently wrote a piece together that was in The Hill, and as we were doing the research, we were also talking about Oklahoma. She went to Oklahoma and thought about moving there. I mean, she was really she was internationally traveled, not just in the United States. And people were making speeches at that time before there was television and the internet. If Ida B. Wells came to town to make a speech, she was the attraction for the week. And speaking of other places, I just wanted to do a little list of the people who are watching. We have in the audience someone from Albany, New York, Arlington, Virginia, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Monroe, New Jersey, Jackson, Mississippi, White Bear Lake, Minnesota, Pasadena, California. That probably gets the prize for the farthest location. New Orleans, DC, Washington, DC, Annapolis, Maryland, Alexandria, Virginia, and Fort Worth, Texas. So we welcome all of you, and we are really appreciative that you're listening in today. So Michelle, I wanted to, before, we still have another 9 or so minutes, I wanted to ask you about your books, because you put together books with Ida's own words. What made you decide to do that? Why did you think there was a need for that, for us to hear what Ida was saying?
Right. Well, I mean, there were few biographies written about my great-grandmother, and also her autobiography, which was edited and published by my grandmother, Alfreda Duster. And so I felt that there was a growing interest in learning about Ida, and almost all the books that were out were about her. And I felt that she was such a good writer, that maybe people who are interested in learning about her life might be interested in hearing her voice. And I thought her voice was really important for people to hear, because she became famous because of her writing. And so I felt that hearing her voice unfiltered and uninterpreted would be a way for people to get a window into her personality through her own words. I also thought it was important for journalists in particular to have the opportunity to read her writing unfiltered and unedited for technique purposes, to actually study her craft, because she was obviously so effective as a journalist that I wanted to make her writing easily accessible, with the hope, my hope was that it would be incorporated into journalism schools.
Well, and we see that she recently won the Pulitzer Prize special citation. You know, just having her words there, and we see, you know, not just on her birthday, you see a lot of this, but throughout the year, she's quoted in Instagram memes. She is often quoted by people to shore up their own activism. Someone was asking, are you involved in activism today? Can you talk about what you're doing?
Right, well, my form of activism is when it comes to public history projects. And I've recently decided to realize that that is a form of activism. But I'm really very interested in creating more equity when it comes to Black women's representation in public spaces. And I think it's important because I think people who are African American need to see ourselves in these public spaces. And I think that it's important for people who are not African American to see people who don't look like them. So I think it's good for everybody, because we are part of this country, we contributed to this country, and the history needs to be known. And I feel like there's so many different ways that people can learn information outside of a school setting, outside of an academic setting, and I do teach, so I have no problems with being in an academic setting. But I realize that right now about 25% of Americans have a college degree, so that means 75% don't. And so I want to make this information accessible to everybody who just walks in public spaces, to see monuments, markers, murals, street signs, films. And I'm writing books, so I'm trying to hit every medium to help people to make this kind of information accessible.
So there's a statue, there's the street name. What are some of the things talk to me about those ceremonies, you know, what people's reaction is when they see Ida, when she's there before them? It makes an impact, it's designed to make an impact.
Right, well, the monument that I'm working on has not been completed yet. Hopefully, there's been so many delays, but hopefully it'll be completed by this time next year. But I was involved in having the Ida B. Wells Drive renamed. I mean, a street was renamed to Ida B. Wells Drive, a really large street in downtown Chicago. In fact, it's the first street in downtown Chicago named after any woman or any person of color. So it's very historic. In addition to that, it's a very large street. It's 3 lanes going each direction and feeds into 2 interstates. So you can't get much more, you know, seen in the city when it comes to that street. And then I was involved in having a historical marker in an honorary street named after her. And I think it makes a difference because I'm getting, people contacting me saying, "Oh my God, I saw Ida B. Wells drive. I almost, had to stop my car." And it's a little dangerous, because it's on a highway. But it just makes people feel excited and happy and proud, not just proud about Ida, but proud of themselves, of like, I am here. I think some people feel a connection to Ida's name being seen, to us as Black women being seen. So it's validating and it's empowering.
Right, representation really matters. So someone is asking, what are your thoughts about the mural at Union Station in Washington, D.C.?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to see it in person because it's only there for a short time and I don't live in DC. But so I've only seen pictures, but based on what I've seen, it looks amazing. 3 words, amazing. And I mean, I'm almost speechless at how impactful that is. And creative, because I mean, obviously Ida's image is so, prominent, but then the fact that the image is made out of so many small pieces that tell the stories of thousands of other women is so innovative and creative and inclusive. I think it's a masterpiece, really.
And you've talked with the artist?
I haven't talked to her directly so much. Well, I'm going to have more conversation with her. I have, let her know that I love the piece and we're going to have further discussion.
Right. No, it's an amazing piece and I really need to get on the Metro myself and go to see it. Someone is asking, do you have any recordings of Ida's speeches?
No, I do not. I do not have any recordings of her speeches.
Right. But we have her incredible words. So just in terms of what's going on now, we have talked about some of the parallels, but you live not that far from Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I know that I follow you on Twitter and I know that you often have things to say about what's going on now. As we both do, both, I think we are, we're at a reckoning in America right now. Doc Rivers' comments yesterday or 2 days ago were quite impactful, the suspension of the NBA playoffs. But, Ida would have been right in the middle of this, having something to say. But what are your observations about the parallels between then and now?
I mean, I feel that it's actually unfortunate that we do have parallels between then and now. I mean, considering the fact that Ida died almost 90 years ago, in 1931. And so here we are 9 decades after she spent 5 decades, working tirelessly to, have equality and justice in our country. And it kind of saddens me that here I am 3 generations after her, still kind of dealing with some of the same issues that are manifested in a different way. So, I mean, I think, obviously she would be involved and concerned. And the parallels are just state-sanctioned violence, the criminalization of Blackness, the inequality when it comes to access to education, housing, food, healthcare. I mean, it's just pervasive, just the almost like a 2-tier society that we live in. I mean, after Ida died, there was, well, actually after the 1919 Red Summer, I think across the nation, there was this, restrictive covenants and redlining that happened, in housing. And so almost every place has a certain level of segregation. The whole proliferation of, or the building of suburbs, defunded the urban areas of this country. So as a people, we are the most urban communities of the country. And so a lot of the concentration of the challenges that we deal with are urban. So, the over policing, I mean, it's just, we could just go on down the line.
Mhm. So Michelle, we are at the end, and I'm just wondering if there's any, I know we could go, you and I could talk for a long time. And fortunately, we have collaborated before. I know we will continue to collaborate on things. But any closing thoughts that you have, things that you want people to remember about Ida or the work that you're doing?
I mean, the main thing is that I just feel that we all need to realize that our voices are important. We need to speak up. We need to point out injustice when we see it, and always believe that we deserve the best, because we are part of this country, and we can't let anybody make us think that we're just sort of, trespassers in our own country. But we need to just keep fighting.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I know that we will still be in touch, and
Yes.
we'll have you at the National Archives in person
Yes.
once we get sort of back to normal.
Yes,
So,
that's great.
thank you. So I want to let the audience know that you can get signed copies of two of Michelle's books, Ida in Her Own Words and Ida Abroad, are available at nationalarchivestore.org, and you can see that on your screen. The Archive Store is also featuring a special selection of 19th Amendment Centennial gifts, and I'm going to just put a couple of them up to the camera. You can see the Ida B. Wells bust that we have at nationalarchivestore.org. Here is a Votes for Women doll. I hope you can see that. Well, I'm gonna have to move my camera. There you go. So there's that. A pin, Votes for Women, and a selection of really beautiful scarves. This particular one, if I can be Vanna White, has the 19th Amendment. So I hope that people will come to the store at nationalarchivestore.org, and for the rest of the month, a few more days, the 30 to 50% off on selected collections. Also, our commemoration of the 19th Amendment continues this evening at 5 p.m. with a very special conversation with 3 secretaries of state on the important role they play in the election process and the continued struggle for women's rights. 100 years later, women in charge of the ballot box will include secretaries of state from Florida, Washington, and New Jersey. You can find more information and register for this event this evening at archivesfoundation.org/women. And finally, on behalf of the National Archives, I'd like to thank all of the wonderful sponsors you see here on the screen. It is their generous support that helps make these rightfully hers related programs possible. We are grateful for their partnership with the National Archives and the National Archives Foundation. Thank you again for joining us, for being part of today's program. Be safe, be well, and in the spirit of the 19th Amendment, vote. Thank you.
America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Here in America, there is always something better out there if you're willing to work for it.
The 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, became enshrined in our Constitution. So we must rise up!
Please welcome Chair of the National Archives Foundation, Governor Jim Blanchard.
Good evening. We have a great show tonight for you, and we're glad you're all here, especially Mrs. Laura Bush. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. I'm speaking on behalf of our foundation, our National Archives Foundation, and our Executive Director, Patrick Madden, who you'll hear from, and also our Board of Directors. In fact, I would like our Board of Directors to please stand. All right. This is our 2018 Records of Achievement Award ceremony. We are a nonprofit partner with the National Archives, and we offer support, financial, creative support, energy to help the archives tell the American story and to really enhance the archives' mission of making billions of important federal documents, photographs, film, and artifacts accessible to the public. In short, we work to tell the American story. Our foundation works to inspire Americans to learn about our past and play an active role in our future. And we're committed to capturing the American story in its entirety through a number of exhibitions, events, public programs, and educational initiatives. I would also like to recognize some of our friends who are here, who've been, everyone here is a distinguished guest, and we thank you for being here. But I do want to acknowledge Congressman Mark Meadows and Debbie Meadows. They've been good friends of the archives. Please stand. And I cannot see with these lights as to whether District Judge for District of Columbia, Beryl Howell is here or not. If Judge Howell is here, she recently swore in new citizens. Please stand, Judge Howell. Thank you. Beryl. And also Senior U.S. District Judge Royce Lambeth of the District of Columbia. Thank you for being with us. Now, a special friend of one of our board members is Mayor Mary Marvin, the mayor of Bronxville, New York. Welcome. And one of my pals I want to introduce, because he's not only a friend of the archives and a lover of history, but now what luck, he happens to be General Counsel of the Office of Management and Budget, Mark Paoletta. And Tricia, please, thanks for coming, please. And two other former colleagues of mine in Congress, former Congressman Tom McMillan and Congressman Charlie Dent. Please rise, please. On their way is our ambassador to Canada, U.S. Ambassador Kelly Knight Craft, and her husband Joe. And I have a feeling because they were flying in, the weather may have altered their plans. They are here now? Please stand. Where are they? All right. Thank you for coming. You've had a busy week, Ambassador. Got a new treaty. And I think a good one. We want to thank our leader, our world-renowned National Archivist, David Ferriero, for welcoming us to his home. Thank you, David. We also want to welcome and thank tonight's sponsors, AT&T, Edgeworth Economics, and David M. Rubenstein, who have always showed us strong support, and we deeply appreciate it. Thank you. So tonight we present our highest honor to Laura Bush in recognition of her lifelong commitment to civic education and literacy. This is a subject very near and dear to the hearts of our board members and our National Archives and our archivists. In fact, along with the archives, we aboard the foundation are working on a plan to dramatically expand civic education and engagement, so stay tuned for more of that. But our awardee tonight, Laura Bush, has shared her love of literature with children and adults from all walks of life, from her work as a teacher and a librarian to her work as First Lady, and that at the George W. Bush Center. Laura Bush has demonstrated the power of a good story to captivate and inspire. Here at the National Archives, we too understand the power of a good story, which is why we work so hard each day to tell the story of our nation. And so we look forward to this program tonight. So now I would like to welcome, it's my pleasure, the leader of our archives, the man who has opened his doors this evening to all of us. please join me in welcoming our world-renowned and friend, the Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero.
Thank you, Jim, and good evening all, and welcome to my house as we honor former First Lady Laura Bush. And those of you who have been at the last couple of award ceremonies have come to appreciate my demonstration of socks. So tonight we have a special Laura Bush version of the socks. Which are special librarian socks, available in our shop, by the way, and online. You can order them online. But I'm delighted to recognize a fellow librarian. And you may be surprised to learn how much we have in common. We studied for our master's in library science at the same time, relocated to Washington for executive branch positions on Pennsylvania Avenue, and both proudly champion our nation's history. But in all seriousness, First Lady Laura Bush's unwavering support of civic literacy, her passion for education, and her unyielding commitment to the empowerment of women make her both an obvious choice for this award and for the launch of our Women's Vote Centennial celebration. Laura Bush has been an educator, a librarian, the First Lady of Texas, the First Lady of the United States, and a global advocate through the George W. Bush Presidential Center. The common thread linking her life's work together is this intrinsic love of learning that she continues to share with the world. Laura Bush's educational work through the Bush Center in programs such as Middle School Matters, the School Leadership Initiative, Advancing Accountability in Education, and of course my favorite, your Foundation for America's Libraries, all demonstrate a commitment and passion for ensuring a literate society. This mission was what President Franklin Roosevelt had in mind when he created the National Archives, a mission which continues to be vital to our democracy. Laura Bush said, "We must prepare our children and grandchildren with the tools they need to be informed, engaged citizens who care about individual liberty and democracy. We must teach them history. We must insist they understand the government they are blessed to live under. We must teach our children to listen, to show empathy, to show civility in the face of disagreement, and to overcome malice and hate. And we must model the behavior ourselves." At the National Archives, we work to provide students of all ages with the tools they need to understand history and become active participants in our government. We recently launched the Civic Education webpage to make our education initiatives accessible to parents, teachers, and students. Docs Teach, our online tool for teaching with documents, features more than 10,000 primary source documents and interactive activities for teachers and students. We make history fun with sleepovers in the rotunda upstairs. Coming up this weekend, as a matter of fact, Saturday night, our latest, with a theme of Native Americans. And we host a variety of educational programs across the country throughout the year. We would not be here tonight if it wasn't for our partner, the National Archives Foundation, helping the National Archives reach an ever larger and more diverse audience. Together, we make civic literacy a reality. With the support of the Foundation and generous benefactors like you, we celebrated our fourth annual July reading of the 4th of July reading of the Declaration of Independence on the steps of this building. We hosted 2 widely popular National Archives sleepovers, and we'll launch our next exhibit, Rightfully Hers, this March on the 19th Amendment and women's right to vote in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery. Tonight, we celebrate this shared vision between Laura Bush and the National Archives family. Through the work of the former First Lady, the National Archives, and the National Archives Foundation, we're striving for a nation in which all children have the same love of learning that drove Laura Bush to pursue her dreams and make the world a better place. Thank you for joining us this evening as we celebrate our public-private partnership with the foundation and pay tribute to Laura Bush.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present our 2018 Records of Achievement honoree, Laura Bush. Please. And we are joined by the Vice Chair of our National Archives Foundation, the best Vice Chair anyone could ever have, Cokie Roberts. They're going to have a conversation, but I get to say a couple more things. All right. We give this award each year. It's special. We try to make the award something of special significance to the honoree. And we understand that Laura Ingalls Wilder is one of our honoree's favorite authors. In 2017, Laura Bush wrote, in the hot, and I quote, "In the hot, arid lands of West Texas, I tried to imagine being surrounded by tall pine trees and heavy snow. And of course, I identified with the main character, a brown-haired girl named Laura." The 2018 Records of Achievement Award features a handwritten insert by Laura Ingalls Wilder to a typescript draft of her 5th Little House novel, By the Shores of Silver Lake. This insert was added to an early draft attempting to explain how Mary, Laura's older sister, had become blind in the intervening time period since On the Banks of Plum Creek. These are books, by the way, I have not read, but obviously I don't know what to, but a lot of people have. This insert is part of the collection of the Rose Wilder Lane papers at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum. And so, what you've been waiting for now, our journalist, best-selling author, historian in her own right, and our vice chair, Cokie Roberts, will now have a conversation with Laura Bush about her contributions to our society. We thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much. I did love the Laura Ingalls Wilder books. And so this is a really wonderful gift. Thank you very, very much. I'm thrilled with it. Thanks a lot.
2 more introductions before we start. Many of your former staff members are here. That's right. So would you all please stand? We won't see you, but
we have Anita, who was in the video.
Look at all of them.
Oh, here they are.
There they all are.
Thank you all. Great.
And of course, you know how important they are to the work you've done. And the man you convinced to start the National Book Festival, Jim Billington, the longtime Librarian of Congress.
He was my partner in the National Book Festival. Thank you so much, Dr. Billington.
And Marjorie Billington.
He knew I'd started the Texas Book Festival, and he called me right after we moved to the White House and said, let's have a National Book Festival. So thank you, Dr. Billington, very much. Appreciate it.
So we all want to know.
How was the wedding?
How was the wedding? And also, I have to tell you, as a reporter, keeping it secret, not good. How did you manage that?
Well, I think Barbara just kept it a secret. Plus, so few people were invited. It was just our family and Craig's family. And it didn't include Jeb or Neil or any of those other uncles. So it was just really just our family. She wanted to get married there because that's where her grandfather is. And she wanted to be with him. And so we had a wedding outside looking at the ocean. And then we went in and had dinner at the dining room table. There were 20 of us at the dining room table. So it was just perfect. So it was Barbara and Craig, her new husband, who we like a lot, and his family and our family. And the little flower girls were Mila, Jenna's little girl, and Emma, Craig's niece, and the ring bearer was Poppy. who was very proud of being a ring bearer. During of course, the box was empty because they knew that she couldn't really have the ring. So Craig had it in his pocket.
Poppy is the baby.
Poppy's
Is
the baby, the
right.
3-year-old. But so during the entire ceremony, she walked around with the ring box to show it to everyone. Anyway, it was
That
very,
was
very
wise because
sweet. and it-
Actually, my nephew did lose my ring.
The ring,
my
exactly.
My wedding. And it was actually found by President Johnson's doctor with the little ear light. So,
So it was a lot of fun. We had a wonderful time. It was just this weekend. George and I just flew from Maine yesterday morning to Washington.
well, congratulations to everyone, and we were all very pleased to see it. But as I say, secret. I was just with you and your daughters and their cousins in Dallas, honoring Barbara Bush's literacy heritage, and we had a panel of the grandchildren, which was hysterical. But one of the things they revealed when you talk about going in for lunch is that you used to have in Kennebunkport taco Sundays with Barbara Bush, and then she died, and the kids.
As soon as she died, we started having hamburger and hot dog Sundays. President Bush said he never had liked those tacos.
All those years he had put up with them. So the last time I think you were on this stage, at least the last time I was with you on this stage, you were here with Michelle Obama, which you've done several times. And I want to come back to that in a little bit. But first I want to talk about First Ladies in general, because, you know, we kind of danced around it a little bit in the video, but it is such an interesting role and an important role, and one that the American people are always kind of nervous about, you know. You've got a lot of power, you can't be fired, they they don't know what you're up to, you know, unless, except what you choose to tell them, right? And therefore, we create our own kind of stories about a First Lady, and you said, and I'm quoting you here, our First Ladies are much more complicated than they ever get treated in the media. And I think what happens is a story goes up about them, a myth that people stick to for all coverage of them forever after. And you felt that
And of
happen
course,
with them.
I was the quiet reader and librarian.
Right, right.
And I was that. I mean, that, you know, there's no doubt about it. But all of our First Ladies have been a lot more complicated and have been very constructive for our country from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. One of the great myths that, you know, they were sitting around pouring tea until Eleanor Roosevelt or something, you know, makes me crazy. But so you've just had at the Bush Center, which is the library part of it is part of the National Archives, a First Lady's special exhibit. Please tell me it wasn't about dresses.
There were a few gowns in it, but no, it was not about dresses, and we didn't want it to be about dresses. People love to come see the dresses, and we had a dress show earlier when the library first opened with some of Nancy Reagan's clothes, but we wanted this to be substantive because we knew that besides wearing lovely gowns, that our First Ladies had made so many contributions to our country. So one gown that was there, though, that I think is interesting was a mock-up of a gown that Dolly Madison made out of the red velvet drapes that she saved from the White House when the British burned the White House.
Where's it been saved?
Well, no, this was a copy.
Copy.
It was a copy of it, so I think the dress was not saved.
Not saved.
But we talked about the contributions that each First Lady had made. It was a show that we did ourselves at the Bush Library curators came up with. And this does give me the chance to thank the National Archives because, of course, the National Archives administer the President's papers. The President's papers are seen as belonging to the people of the United States, and the archives administer those papers. So the National Archives is a very important part of the Bush Library, the museum part, and then, of course, the storage of all the papers that are there at the Bush Library. And so I want to thank the National Archives and the archivists and everyone here for your work. And of course, those employees at the Bush Library are employees, they're archivists that are employees of the government.
So you talk about the role that First Ladies played, and again, you said, and you had a very interesting kind of session with those of us who are historians, et cetera, as you were leaving the White House. So I've written down every word.
Yeah, sure.
And you said, every time I spoke out about something, even heart disease, I would be surprised again at how many people heard me. And I often use Lady Bird Johnson's quote about the First Lady has a podium. And while she was here, she said, I've decided to use it. And you quoted her often about that, and you did take that to heart, deciding to use it.
That's right. And of course, we knew Lady Bird. She was a Texas First Lady. And when she opened the Wildflower Center, close to outside of Austin, we hosted, George was governor, and we hosted on the lawn of the governor's mansion the picnic for the opening of the Wildflower Center, and then went out that night to the opening gala of the National Wildflower Center. And I always really admired Lady Bird Johnson because she thought the way we were, all of us, and our landscape everywhere around our country was enough. And it was beautiful as it was naturally.
Except
and I
the
like
billboards.
that.
She didn't like the billboards.
No billboards, and that was very
Right.
difficult to get
Right.
rid of. In fact,
Very.
I think only 2 states actually managed it, to not have billboards anymore. I was with the governor of Vermont, lone Republican in Vermont, when George ran for president the first time, and he said that they had stayed in suits until just recently to be able to outlaw billboards.
But you then started using that podium at first for things that you had done before, the book festival, literacy. You did a big conference on cognitive development in early childhood. And on your way to the Capitol to testify before the Senate Education Committee, why people thought you were not out there, I don't know. You heard that the first plane had crashed into the World Trade Center.
That's right. So everything that I'd done up to that, the National Book Festival had been that weekend before September 11th. We'd hosted our first state dinner for Mexico, which is where we were obviously neighbors of Mexico and Texas. We expected our, all of our interest in other countries to be centered around our hemisphere and Mexico. All those things had happened, and then I was on Capitol Hill in Senator Ted Kennedy's office about to brief his Senate Committee on Early Childhood Education when we got the word that the planes had flown into the World Trade Center. And we thought, of course, when we heard the first one that it was some odd accident, and then when we heard the second one, we knew it was not an accident. So then, of course, everything changed for me. And the things I'd expected to work on, I still did work on. But then I added other things, like supporting Afghan women and our military, things that I'd never expected really to work on. I'd made a 6th grade report on Afghanistan. I never expected to actually go to Afghanistan.
Now, I'm
but
surprised because your name was Welch. I had to do Afghanistan, but that's because my name was Boggs. It was the top of the alphabet.
Picked it. I picked the country myself. We got to pick the countries.
But you then really took it on. Well, first of all, I should say, by the way, that Mrs. Bush and Senator Kennedy were together pretty much all day as you were trying to figure out what was going on. And Senator Kennedy later said, you get to know somebody in a situation like that. And he said she was steady, assured, and elegant.
That was sweet. Well, he kept up a steady stream of small talk. And he showed me everything on his office walls. He read me a letter that his brother Jack had written to their mother that said, Teddy is getting fat. And he laughed at it. And I never knew if that was the way he had to deal with the trauma, because he'd had so many in his life, or if he thought I'd fall apart. And so he just felt like he had to keep up this, small talk. And then Senator Judd Gregg, who was the minority chairman of the Education Committee, joined us from New Hampshire, and one of our best friends, still one of our best friends. We see him a lot. We're going to see him and have dinner with him next weekend when they'll be in Dallas. His son has moved to Fort Worth. and Judd and I would sort of look at each other while Senator Kennedy talked and told stories and told us things about his office. And so I don't know if he did it because that was just the way he reacted, or if he thought he needed to for me.
Right.
But anyway, then we went out to talk to the press and tell them that obviously the briefing had been canceled, postponed. We were already, you're not going to stop us. We're going to do it later. And he changed his whole personality, became very serious and perfect for the press, really, under the circumstances. And then I did brief the Senate committee a couple of months later.
But you said, I grew in both my realization that I had a podium, but also in my expertise about some international issues that I didn't come to the White House with. And that really did change a lot of your focus. And you went to Afghanistan, I think, 3 times when you were in the White House, and you took on more and more. I think you went to 76 countries.
That's right. I visited 76 countries.
While you were First Lady, going to Africa, Asia, the Middle East. PEPFAR was very much part of your portfolio, saving millions and millions of lives in Africa. Malaria, talking about breast cancer in the Middle East where it wasn't talked about, so it couldn't be treated. Heart disease, all of it.
Gosh, I did a lot.
You did a lot. And actually, that was a great dress exhibit, the First Lady's red dress exhibit on heart disease. But you did also, and this was one that always just gobsmacked me, I have to say, take on the military government of Burma. Big time.
I did. I was a secret friend of Aung San Suu Kyi, where I could send her things. And I would get messages of things she wanted, like seaweed. I think she liked to eat seaweed or drink seaweed or something. And I would always send her a book that I liked, that I thought maybe she would like. So during all those years, I had this friendship with Aung San Suu Kyi and would send her various items and paid a lot of attention to her. And then finally, when we left, she was under house arrest for all those years. By the time we left, she had, been able to be the leader of Burma. But now, as we're watching, we don't know what to think with the Rohingyas. I don't know if the military, who always really were the ones that were in power during the whole time, even though she'd been elected president, I don't know if it's a military thing and she's compromised by the military. Right. I'm not sure because now I'm not in contact with her anymore.
Yeah. But you went to the press room, the briefing room. You were on your way to Jenna's wedding, as I recall. Had a few things to do on the home front, but went into the press room. Now, no First Lady's ever done that before or since. You grabbed the microphone and basically used it to denounce the military rule in Burma because they were not responding to a cyclone where they had not even accepted American aid. And yet you were described as prim. So how do you account for that?
No, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think it is how we treat First Ladies, in the little First Lady nice.
Right. Bless her heart.
Does she make cookies? We really think about Lady Bird Johnson, who was one of the founders of an environmental movement. But people said, isn't that nice that she likes flowers?
She hated the word beautification, in fact. But you kept at it after you left office, of keeping these causes going, particularly Afghan women, but also in Africa. And I want to come back to you and Michelle Obama together, because you had convened First Ladies of Africa Summit, which in itself was just wildly interesting. But then you discovered that the Obamas just happened to be on the continent at the same time as you, and you invited Mrs. Obama to come.
Well, that's one of the things we've done through the Bush Library, and that is this First Ladies Initiative. Working with First Ladies who, in many cases, in many parts of the world, don't have the sort of platform that American First Ladies have. And we've worked with First Ladies to give them the chance to build that kind of platform, because they can work on issues that their husbands aren't working on. And the very first thing we did was an African First Ladies Conference when we were in Africa. And we work with the First Ladies themselves, but also our staff work with their staffs to try to figure out ways they can set up their offices so that the First Ladies can be more effective. Because when you have both leaders, the husband and the wife, working, you can do twice as much. So the first African First Ladies Conference, we hosted in Africa, and Michelle Obama was there, so she could come to it.
Well, it was better than that. Because I had the great honor of being the person to interview the two of them together. I got a call from the Bush Center saying, "Can you be in Tanzania next week?" And I said no. And then my husband said, "Why not?" So off I went, and there were the two of them. And it was, first of all, it was such an important symbol for the First Ladies of Africa to see this
Well, that is a symbol, because in many cases they would never, and they said this, never speak to the leader that was before them because they were corrupt, or, there was some other reason. They wouldn't have that continuity that we have with our former presidents and former First Ladies. And it is kind of like a club, just like the National Governors Association gives you the chance to be with other governors and their spouses, and gives you a chance to know what's going on. It's really very helpful, I think, for First Ladies to be together. And I think it's a great example, both for Americans to see and for other people in other countries to see.
But I remember when I asked at that point, because you had basically said to Mrs. Obama, come and do whatever you want to do, right? You can make a speech, you can, and she could have hijacked it, frankly, right?
She wouldn't have.
No, I know, and you knew that, and she wanted to be in a conversation with you. And I said, as I was having the conversation, Mrs. Obama, you wanted to be in this conversation with Mrs. Bush. Why? And she reached out her hand to you and said, "I love this woman." And it was such a moment of just making you feel good about the country. And then you did it again here the following year, and brought the African First Ladies here.
During the UNGA in New York, when their spouses were in New York for the General Assembly, we hosted it then.
And then you and Mrs. Obama did an event here, I think just this year. Or was it last year? 2 years. Oh my goodness, time flies. This is what happens when you get old. You think it was 5 minutes ago.
She was First Lady.
But it was on military spouses, right? And so do you continue that work together?
No, not really, not since they left. I mean, it doesn't mean we wouldn't at some time continue to do something together, but not really. We've mainly seen them, as you know, at funerals.
Where there was, press about the fact that President Bush gave
her an Altoid.
That was considered, I don't know what.
I don't know why that was so fascinating.
But you do say that there is this bond among First Ladies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everyone knows, the First Ladies know what it's like, and they're friendly with each other. Maybe they wouldn't be friendly if they'd run against each other. But
although the presidents end up being friends, too.
Yeah, the presidents do, too.
I mean, I remember actually interviewing President Bush 41 soon after he left office, and he said, I can't imagine that I'll ever be friends with Clinton the way that Ford and Carter are. And then he became a fifth son.
Yeah, exactly. Well, of course, that also speaks to how President Bush is, which is so great, and he's so courtly, and he's so, that's just how he is, that he would be friends with anyone. He would never have a feud with somebody that beat him in some race.
Mrs. Bush might have.
I might have, yeah. Or Barr would have, for sure.
Right.
Not really. She wouldn't either. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about Barr.
Okay, let's do that.
I wanted to tell you all some things about her. One thing at her funeral, which was perfect. I don't know if you all watched it. I think it was televised, but she had planned it all, and it was really great. And she got to do what no one else really gets to do. She had put out the word that she was not going to have any more treatment. And so everyone started writing her obituaries before she died. And so she got to read them. And they were all, of course, very laudatory. And then she'd ask John Meacham if he would talk at her funeral, and he called her and he said, "Barr, I've got my talk ready. Do you want to hear it?" So I think I hope she got to hear it all. She probably was in so much pain then that she didn't really care anymore and was ready to go on. But anyway, it was when we had the funeral in Houston at their church, St. Martin's. Then we drove to College Station, where their gravesite is, at the Bush Presidential Library at Texas A&M University. So we drove there, and we had a police escort, and they just would stop the cars at the access roads before they got on. They didn't really hold up a lot of traffic, but we'd look down at the access roads, and those Texans would be out of their cars, and those Texas men would have their cowboy hats over their hearts. It was really, really sweet. And then when we got to Texas A&M, we walked with the casket by 700 saluting Texas A&M cadets.
Fabulous.
It was really lovely. And it was perfect
It
for
was
Barr.
perfect. It was perfect in every way. I mean, I was covering it on television and, weeping my way through, but happy tears, because it was.
She was ready to go. And
well, tell
so
the story that
encouraged us.
she told your husband about.
Well, so George called her. We had seen her. She had fallen. And we'd been in Houston. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia had come to the U.S., and so he wanted to meet with George and his dad. So we went to Houston and had lunch with him. He has ended up being slightly, we're kind of worried about him now. But anyway, so while Barr was in the hospital because she'd fallen, so George and I went by to see her. So when we got the word that she was not going to have any more treatment, we didn't try to go down to Houston to see her. I think that all the other kids did, but we had just seen her. And so George called her and said, "Mother, you were a wonderful mother, and I'm so glad you were my mother, and thank you for everything." And she said, "Well," and he said, "I love you." And she said, "Well, I love you too, George." And she said, "You're my favorite son." On the phone. So she stayed funny and quick till the end.
And told a nurse or a doctor or whatever that he turned out this way because.
Yeah, exactly. So then when we had gone to see her after we saw the Crown Prince, we didn't really realize she was about to die.
Uh-huh.
Even when she said she wasn't going to have any more treatment, we just still were planning on going to Maine and where she would be, because she wouldn't, which bedroom she'd be in. And we didn't know it was really that soon. But when she was in the hospital, when George went to see her, she said, "You know what," to the doctor, "you know why George turned out the way he did?" And the doctor said, "No, why?" And she said, "Because I drank and smoked when I was pregnant with him."
She
never was
missed
always
it.
bad.
She never missed it, right? So I guess we should end on a somewhat serious note about civic education, because it's something you care deeply about, and you know that our children don't learn it, and the numbers are just horrible of what people don't know, and it is wonderful when we have these naturalization ceremonies here in front of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. Those people have actually all had to learn.
Know it. Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, we need to teach it more. I think we went through sort of a stage where we were embarrassed about ourselves, like we were trying to act like we're better or something. But the fact is, we're so lucky to have inherited the institutions that we inherited, and all the ones that support our democracy. And it's really important for people to know about them and to be proud of it. Why not be proud of it? One of the things we're working on with women from Tunisia and Egypt, and that we started with at the Bush Institute with those women from those two countries, because they were the two Arab Spring countries. But they don't have the institutions to support a democracy. And it's been very hard, and both countries have sort of slid back. And we inherited those institutions. We didn't have to do anything for them. We were just lucky to get them. And it's really important, I think, for people to know that and to know about them. The reason we can have a democracy is because we have those institutions. The free press, the independent judiciary, I mean, all the things that we have. And so I think it's important that we teach that. And we need to go back and not be embarrassed about teaching it.
And we have to get it on the test.
That's right. We need to get it on the test. And then if it's on the test, they'll teach it.
Right. No, it's true.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for all of your teaching
Thank you
over
very
the
much.
many
Thank you,
years
Courtney.
and the wonderful work that you continue to do.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations
And thanks
on this.
to everybody. Thank you for your support for the National Archives. I encourage you to give more to the foundation. Thank you all very, very much.
Yes. Laura and Koki, thank you for allowing us to enjoy your conversation. And Laura Bush, thank you for your service to our country and for helping build a better world. Thank you. Now, we're going to do some photos. Invite all of you as we finish the program to join us upstairs in the Rotunda Galleries for our gala dinner, our annual gala dinner. And thank you again, all of you, for coming.
Taking a look at the history of America's presidents and the need for modern presidents to also be celebrities. Then on Tuesday, April 28th at noon, again here in the McGowan Theater, we'll have General Ann Dunwoody, retired, America's first female four-star general. She will be here to share her leadership lessons based on 38 years of service in the U.S. Army. And afterwards, she'll be signing copies of her book, A Higher Standard. To find out more about these and all of our public programs and exhibits, please consult our monthly calendar of events. Copies are available in the lobby upstairs along with the sign-up sheet, so you can receive the calendar by mail or email, or you may visit our website at www.archives.gov/calendar. Another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the National Archives Foundation. The foundation supports the work of the National Archives, especially its exhibits, education activities, and public programs, all of which are near and dear to my heart, just like the one you are about to experience tonight. Applications for membership in the National Archives Foundation may be found in the lobby, and as Archivist David Ferriero likes to share, no one has ever been turned down for membership in the foundation. Now, on with tonight's program. C-SPAN's year-long history series, First Ladies, Influence and Image, featured interviews with more than 50 preeminent historians and biographers. In the recently released informative book, these experts paint intimate portraits of all 45 First Ladies, their lives, ambitions, and unique partnerships with their presidential spouses. This series and the book provide an up-close historical look at these fascinating women who survived the scrutiny of the White House, sometimes at great personal cost, while supporting their families and famous husbands, and sometimes changing history. Our program tonight will feature a lively discussion with some of these contributing historians whom you'll hear more about shortly. To moderate tonight's program, we're pleased to welcome Susan Swain, the moderator for C-SPAN's First Ladies, Influence and Image. Susan Swain is president and co-CEO of C-SPAN, sharing responsibility for all operations of the public affairs cable network. She oversees programming and marketing for C-SPAN's 3 television channels and C-SPAN radio. She helped launch the Washington Journal, Book TV, and American History TV. She has also been involved in the creation of numerous C-SPAN history series, such as American Presidents, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and American Writers. For over 30 years, she has been one of C-SPAN's principal on-camera interviewers. Most recently, on April 14th, First Ladies was released as a book by Public Affairs Books, featuring a collection of her interviews from the television series. It is the 9th book Susan has edited for C-SPAN and Public Affairs. And as you noticed when you came in, we will have copies of the book available for sale after the program, and she will be signing copies for you. So now let me turn the podium over to Susan Swain and to tonight's program.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and I really appreciate you braving the traffic into DC on a night when there's a Caps game. And for those of you watching at home on C-SPAN, thanks for being with us. So many of you were with us for the First Lady series, and it's fun to be revisiting some of those topics again. As Jim told you, actually what I wanted to start with was a quote from Abigail Adams. When she sent John off to the Continental Congress, she sent him with an exhortation. John, remember the ladies. And tonight we're going to do that for Abigail, so she should be happy. Because the lives of these First Ladies are often forgotten, and they shouldn't be, because they're very interesting. And they've also made an enormous contribution to our history. What we tried to do with the series was personalize their history, and what we're going to try to do tonight is tell you some of those stories, along with some wonderful video and film from the National Archives collection, and also some of their historic photographs, and also some of the clips from our own series. So we hope we'll inform you and entertain you, and along the way inspire you to ask some questions, because there's 30 minutes set aside at the end for your involvement in things that you are interested in. Our goals tonight are to learn about the First Lady's contributions to the presidency, and since we are now embarking on a new presidential campaign, can you believe it's time for that already? We are already looking at the spouses of the candidates, and I say spouses instead of wives, because the Clinton entrance into the campaign kind of changes the whole dynamic and what our definition of a first spouse might be. So that will be something we'll be thinking about as well. Well, to whet your appetite for what you're going to see ahead, before I introduce our panelists, I want to show you a priceless piece of film. This is from the National Archives collection from the Truman Library. 1945, National Airport, a place we all know very well, when Bess Truman, brand new First Lady, was asked to do a very early event to christen an air ambulance. And watch what happened. Let's take a look.
At the National Airport, ambulances with wings, one each for Navy and Army, ready to be christened by Mrs. Harry S. Truman, who, with her daughter Margaret, will do the honors in her first public appearance. But Mrs. Truman is in for a surprise. By an oversight, the champagne bottle, unlike this one, hasn't been properly prepared, etched to break the glass on impact. And glass cutting is behind successful christenings like these. Now Mrs. Truman, unaware that her bottle is not prepared, refusing to be rattled, the new First Lady joins in the crowd's laughter. Let's see how her military aid meets the crisis.
Mrs. Truman kept her cool, as you could see, but guess what she was feeling inside? Mortally embarrassed. And what happened as a result of that is she elected not to do any more public appearances. Now, that's not a possibility for women today who hold this role, because with the next presidency, the Eisenhower administration, television burst onto the scene and began following first ladies everywhere. Bess Truman was really the last who was able to live a private life as much as she could while she was in the White House. But this is a really great entrance into what we're going to be talking about tonight, about women who are sometimes thrust into these roles by history and have to learn to adapt to the glare of the spotlight. I've got 4 fabulous panelists I want to introduce to you tonight. Now, you heard that there were 56 people involved, 56 experts involved in our television series, a year-long series from President's Day 2013 to President's Day 2014. And when we put them together in the book, the reason we did the book is because there are lots of books on First Ladies, but never such a broad collection of various points of view under one set of covers. And we're delighted to have 4 of the people who were part of that process. First, you're going to meet Carl Sferrazza Anthony. He is the historian of the National First Ladies Library in Canton, Ohio. I lost count the number of First Ladies books, somewhere over a dozen that he has written, and has lots of also online material about them. And he's joining us here from Los Angeles. Carl, let me welcome you. Thank you for coming. Edna Medford is local. She is the chair of the history department at Howard University, and much published herself. She is a Lincoln expert specializing in the Civil War and Reconstruction, and she has had an incredibly busy year. She was part of the National Commission on the Lincoln bicentennial celebration. Carl was in my seat, but I would have claimed it, no problem. And she has spent the entire year with the commission attending all of those Lincoln events. So as sad as we were to reach the anniversary of Lincoln's expiration last week, she's probably breathing a little sigh of relief that she will be able to reclaim some of her time back. So let me introduce Edna Green Medford of Howard University. Now, I've managed to do something that no moderator should do. I have 2 panelists by the same first name. So let me introduce you to Carl Cannon. Carl is the Washington bureau chief of Real Clear Politics. He has covered every single presidential campaign since 1984 and has covered all the White Houses since then. He is an author himself, a biographer, and he is also a historian. If any of you sign up for his daily Real Clear Politics morning briefing, you get the daily politics, but you always get them with a history lesson because he loves history. He comes by this passion for newspaper and politics honestly. His father, Lou Cannon, covered Ronald Reagan as a governor in California and was Ronald Reagan's biographer, so he grew up in that environment. Great friend of C-SPAN, as are all our panelists, Carl Cannon. And our final panelist is someone I've just gotten to meet over the past 2 years working on this series, Chrissa Thompson. I hope you read her byline in the Washington Post. She is a reporter who is covering Michelle Obama and has written many detailed stories. She just told us that she's just finished a story on First Gentlemen, which is perfect for our discussion tonight, which is going to be in tomorrow's newspaper. In addition to covering Laura Bush, she has also covered Laura Bush as well as Michelle Obama, and she's beginning, as I said, to look ahead to the new crop of candidates. So she joins us to bring the journalist's modern-day perspective to this discussion. Chrissa Thompson. Now, I know that many of you bring your cell phones to these, and we've got a Twitter account set up tonight. So as I mentioned, the questions are going to be at the 1 hour point, but if you see some interesting topics along the way and you want to send us a tweet, I'm going to be getting them right here. I promise not to be too distracted by that. And I'll mix in your Twitter questions as well. And that's for our C-SPAN audience watching at home. Use the tag @FirstLadies, and I'll be getting them and using them throughout the section. So, welcome everybody. We're going to start each of our sections tonight with clips. And the first one is really delving into our major topic tonight, which is that duality of the public life and the private life that all of these now women have been forced into by circumstance, some of them happy partners along the way, the other history thrust them into the role. But we ask a lot of them in this role. And we're going to start with a clip from an interview that we did at C-SPAN with Michelle Obama when she was new into the role, talking about this balance between private life and public responsibilities. Let's watch.
I think every First Lady brings their unique perspective to this job. If you didn't, you couldn't live through it. I think to the extent that this feels natural to me at any level, and I would never have thought that living in the White House and being First Lady would feel natural, it's because I try to make it me. I try to bring a little bit of Michelle Obama into this, but at the same time respecting and valuing the tradition that is America's.
This is not a new concept. In the book, what we did is include one quote from every First Lady to start the chapter. And I'd like to share with you the quote that we chose for Martha Washington, the first in this role. "I never go to the public place," she wrote. "Indeed, I think I'm more like a state prisoner than anything else. There are certain bounds set for me which I must not depart from, and as I cannot do as I like, I'm obstinate and stay at home a great deal." Now, more than 100 years later, Grace Coolidge in the White House wrote this, thinking about her role. She said, "This was I, and yet not I. This was the wife of the President of the United States, and she took precedence over me. My personal likes and dislikes must be subordinated to the consideration of those things that were expected or required of her." So it's something, Carl, that First Ladies have been struggling with, how to maintain the sense of self with all of these responsibilities thrust upon them.
And I'm so happy you begin the discussion this way because, you know, it really goes down to the very root, I think, of what has always been a matter of fascination, not only for the American public, but for the world public. As you all probably know, you hear so often from foreign journalists who are interested in the role of First Lady, and I think we're going to see perhaps at some point, certainly, the role of a First Gent, you know, that it really isn't just about gender, that it's really about unaccountable power. And as you said, those thrust into it. So I think early on, when this sort of sudden awareness, you have to remember in the 19th century, there was a real sense of a woman's name should not be in public. And so the whole concept of First Lady was like, you know, there was a real conflict for who they were as people to have this public interest in their lives. But, you know, Jackie Kennedy, I think, said it best. She said, when she, during the 1960 campaign, she said, you pick 3 or 4 stories that are real about yourself, that illustrate a point, a good point, about yourself or your family, and you let them give them out, and that's it. And that's going to be, and you retell those same stories over and over again, and you try and just use that, and that's how much of your real self, a certain percentage, you give to your persona.
And we didn't have media coverage of anywhere near what we have today, and yet even the early First Ladies felt the glare.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think of someone like Martha Washington, who was the first and who was actually setting the tone for everyone who followed, it must have been incredibly difficult for her. You know, she probably had the same kind of scrutiny in a sense that her husband did, probably more so than he did. People knew her, of course. She had always been around the winter camps with her husband, and so the soldiers certainly knew her. People appreciated what she had done before she became First Lady, and I think after she became First Lady too, she was pretty popular. But people did begin to criticize because this is new territory for her, and she doesn't know quite how to behave. All she has is the example of Europe, of European royalty. And so she's trying to establish some practices that would be in keeping with what they would have been doing in Europe. And Americans resented that. They certainly did not want her to go in that direction. So she had a tremendous burden. And someone like Martha, who had spent all that time during the Revolution with her husband, supporting her husband, all she wanted was just to be able to go back home and be a private citizen.
Let me jump to Carissa and ask you about watching Michelle Obama as closely as you have. That clip was from her early days. Did you see a growing comfort with the role over the years, a maturation into it?
Absolutely. I think initially, and she kind of described herself in the 2007 campaign, and her husband told stories about, you know, he needed to get her blessing and that it was a process. in order to do that. But you see her now, and she's fully bought into the role. She talks about it as being a bright spotlight, and whatever she stands in front of, the light shines there. And so how do you use that? How do you use that platform? And so I think for her, being able to see the value in the celebrity that came with the role, in the press attention, which she also is not very comfortable with. I was interested to hear Carl say that about Jackie Kennedy, because I think First Ladies subsequently have also done that, share with us a few stories, but kept a piece of themselves behind. And so Michelle Obama does that as well. But you see her enjoying the role, especially when she's with children, when she's pushing issues that she enjoys. You know, and I think that growth is going to continue. And she and her husband are young, so they're not going anywhere. So we'll be able to see how she continues to engage with the public.
So Carl Cannon, of the...
Every man up here is named Carl.
I know. it either makes it easy or difficult, depending upon... So if, looking over the First Ladies since 1984 election that you've seen up close and covering them, have any of them really struggled with this private-public duality?
Well, you know, that clip that you showed of Michelle Obama was, excuse me, of the two quotes, Grace Coolidge and Martha Washington. Mrs. Obama gave an interview yesterday. Was it yesterday to the kids?
Yes.
She hit on both of those themes in that interview. She says, you know, what don't you like about their kids? So they'll ask you, you know, what do you, well, you can't go out, she says.
Yeah.
You can't, I'm stuck here. You can't just go out. And the other thing, they said, did you always want to be a first lady? And I was thought of the Grace Coolidge line. No, she said, I wanted to be a pediatrician. So that's not what she wanted to be when she grew up. But to me, Michelle Obama has embraced the role in an uncommon way, more than any of the others I've covered. Hillary Clinton's an exception. She saw it as well, obviously as a stepping stone. She often talked about Eleanor Roosevelt. And it's as if Eleanor Roosevelt, you know, Eleanor Roosevelt could have run for president now.
Right.
They would have handed her the nomination. Party would have been hers if we had this environment. And so Hillary Clinton sort of can be the personification of Eleanor Roosevelt 50 years later. But in terms of just embracing all of this role for what it is, Michelle Obama to me is almost a transformational figure. I don't cover the White House anymore. I covered it for 15 years now. I edit a person who covers the White House, so I can sort of say what I think a little more. And if Alexis Simmendinger is watching this program, you still have to be objective about Michelle Obama, but I don't.
Yeah. The transformational concept is interesting, though, because Eleanor Roosevelt was deemed transformational, but no one who followed her did as she did. So,
Susan, can I explain really quickly what I
Sure.
meant by that? Michelle Obama is the first African-American First Lady. We talked about that. People have written about that. You've written about that.
Right, absolutely.
She's also, and I think, something even broader than that. She's the first, I want to say, post-Title IX First Lady. She walks with a kind of confidence. You see these studies, if you've been at college campus lately, these, you know, girls when they're little, they're just like the boys, they're athletic, and because they mature a little faster, they're just as good athletes, and then they get to an age where they slouch and they do this. And Michelle Obama doesn't do that. And she walks and she has a confidence, a physical confidence, a confidence in her mental abilities. Just her self-confidence to me as a person is sort of an inspiration.
May I just add very briefly onto that? I think something that's really, it's so easy and it's so fascinating when we all have about public figures the facts of their story, and we know, you know, what their resume is, but and how often we forget those things. But Michelle Obama has perhaps the greatest degree of executive experience before coming to the White House since Lady Bird Johnson. And when I look at what you said about Mrs. Obama, I think one reason that a lot of these people are willing, including, look at the Clintons, willing to give it up, their privacy and, you know, in the intrusions, is really that opportunity to really make a permanent change in perhaps the way the American people think or perceive something. And we're really talking about some profound things here. Lady Bird Johnson really profoundly helped change the way Americans think about their visual environment as well as the safety of it. And has essentially been forgotten, but she was part of that. She gave velocity to that movement, as I think Michelle Obama does now, about what we eat. In 50 years, people might forget that she was involved, but she's been part of that. And I think the chance to do that is why a lot of them say, I'll give up